Hi, it's Raghu back with Mindrolling, and today I've got a wonderful guest. We're just meeting. I say that with everybody because I only just meet them when I'm doing a podcast for the most part. It's a great way to meet people. Uh, and Jamal Yogis.
It's Yogis, but we can go Yogis.
I like
Yogi
yogis. Yeah,
for the podcast.
yeah.
Yeah.
And if you think like I might have thought, who calls themselves yogis? Like when I first heard of him, heard of Jamal. And the reality is, it's his real name, okay? So anybody who's getting all snickety about that, forget about it.
Right, right. Yogis plural, man, you botched that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Lithuanian. Excuse me. It's Lithuanian. Yogis is, but they do say that Lithuanian is one of the closest to Sanskrit of the
Mm.
European languages. So who knows? Maybe there's some yogis in our lineage way back.
So Jamal wrote a book. He's written several books. This is his third book, I believe. All Our Waves Are Water, Stumbling Toward Enlightenment and the Perfect Ride. And what's fun for me about this, and it's a memoir book, memoir-ish. Jamal is a surfing aficionado, so he there's some great surf stories in there, as well as stumbling after enlightenment, towards enlightenment, which so I related with all of that because that's what I did, a long time ago. Same kind of a deal. Stumbled over to India and just like, what? And so it's a wonderful book, and I what I especially like in it is the way that I think a lot of people who listen to this podcast can relate with. You were over there, you were early 20s, right? Maybe you're around 30 now, something like that.
Yeah. Well, no, the book takes place a little while before now. So I'm 37 now, and that it starts off. I think I'm 23 up in the Himalayas. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Oh. So it's yeah, there's a lot of relating that people can do when they first realize that there is a possibility of just simply being happier than you might have been just walking around like, what is this about? And Jamal, like me and many people, especially from my era, early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, went off to India because that seems like a prime place to find yourself, just because the atmosphere there is so conducive to that. But nobody's got to go to India, so don't write me about that, okay? But if you do, I might tell you where to go. So interestingly enough, you spent time with the yogi Haridas Baba, who lives in California and came here just after when I went to India. He was on his way here to America. Do you know his relationship to Neem Karoli Baba, to us?
I'm having trouble remembering. I know there is a connection, but yeah, refresh my memory because I when I lived there with Baba Hari Das, it was before actually this trip to India that where the book starts, and I lived there for about 6 months with him. It was really a blessed period of life, but and I do remember studying some of the lineage, but I can't remember.
Yeah. Well, he was a one could probably call a disciple, although Maharaji Neem Karoli Baba didn't have any disciples. It was all devotees. It was Bhakti Yoga tradition, and he didn't teach anything. So, but Haridas was absolutely very close to him. He's from Nainital, which is the town that we go to all the time still after all of these years, which is close to the temples that Maharaji built around in the Kumaon. And he built the first Hanuman temple in Nainital of Maharaji, actually the Hanuman temple in Nainital, which is a beautiful British resort towns where they went to get away from the heat in the summer. That's where everybody is now. And this is an extraordinary temple, and he did an extraordinary job building this on behalf of, I mean, with Maharaji, or on behalf. And then he abruptly left, and there's a whole thing which I don't know the details of what happened, but he abruptly left. He was Maun. He was silent, Baba, and he left and
Yeah.
he went to California and he established uh, a temple, well, not a temple, an ashrama. I have never been there actually, so I'm not even sure what it is, but certainly like a retreat place of some sort, right?
Like a retreat center.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a cool, really cool mountainside where they did it because Thich Nhat Hanh has a monastery down the road, and then there's also a Christian
Mm.
monastery up there. So it must be sort of a blessed spot. But yeah, now it's coming back to me, and that doesn't surprise me that he built an amazing temple because he was even in his 70s when I lived there. We were, we had to work and we were on rock crew, and we were always building out the temple more. And
70s, you
when he was in
when
in
he was
his
there in the
70s,
70s.
I was there.
Oh,
I
when
was
you're
20, and he would be out there. We'd be breaking rocks and doing pretty like big time construction, and he was out there lifting. And we did it was fun. Before we would do rock crew, they called it. He had a class for the young guys and girls called power pranayama. So we'd go and do a bunch of pranayama, and then we'd go do some hard construction work. It was good times.
Yeah. Anyhow, not to make any kind of big deal, but there certainly is a major connection between Haridas Baba. In fact, we just had over someone who actually was very close to him, named K.K. Shah, who was one of our mentors in India when we were back there with Ram Dass the second time. And there were several families that like we were really close to, and he was one of them. He is one of them. And he was close to Haridas Baba, who was a clerk in Nainital at that before all of that denouement happened. So he knows him in a whole other picture, in a whole other life. Anyhow,
That's cool.
just so what did prompt you though to make this journey to the East?
Well, I was already interested in these contemplative traditions. I was a little bit raised in them. That's how I got the name Jaimal. And but I didn't start meditating on my own until I ran away from home. I was 16. I'd been getting into some mischief as like high school kids do in the suburbs, and I ran away to Hawaii and thought this would be, my escape from suffering. But being 16 and alone and without money and learning to surf and getting beat up by the waves was quickly destabilized. And actually, that's when I started meditating on my own. And I ended up living in a Zen monastery after high school. Actually, first was introduced to Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, and I wanted to be a monk there. But I in France, had to come home to California after high school. And long story short, I lived in a Zen monastery for a year here in California, Orthodox Chinese monastery, Chan, and decided not to be a monk and was trying to figure things out. Like, what am I going to do in the world if I'm not going to be a monk? Ended up, surfing was always a huge part of my life too. And so surfing was sort of helping me reintegrate into the world. I went to live with Baba Haridas, thought I might be one of, sort of live a monk lifestyle up there. But again, I, decided, no, I got to finish college. I kept having this kind of pull up the mountain and down the mountain, up to the seclusion and then the marketplace as is common. And then my first love, in college ended up being an Indian American woman who I call Sati in the book. And so she was sort of like helped me get into the world, transition into a regular job and stuff, because she was very ambitious. And I thought, well, if I'm going to woo this woman, Sati, I've got to have a future plan. And we were planning right after graduation from college that we'd go live in India for a year and do some service work. And she would get to know her family, who she didn't really know. And a month before the trip, she found someone else. And, our relationship was a little rocky anyway. But long story short, she found someone else. I was reeling, just as heartbroken as it was more pain than I ever believed was possible. Just heart completely shut down. And I decided to go to India anyway and be strong. And at the time, I thought I was completely removed from my practice, more or less. Like the whole thing had destabilized me. And I was meditating a little bit, but mostly I just wanted to get Sati back. And so I was running around India doing journalism and trying to do things that I thought might win her back in some way, and failing miserably at that, and just miserable. And eventually, I went up to Baba Hari Das's ashram and I was doing some yoga, but my mind and heart weren't in it. All I cared about was finding Sati. So I finally made it up to the Himalayas, where I'm tutoring some Tibetan monks in English. And I meet a Tibetan monk who instantly we have this connection, and his name's Sonam. And he turns out, we start hanging out, and it turns out he's heartbroken too. And he's looking for his family, who he left in Tibet when he was 11 to ordain with the Dalai Lama, and now he's lost touch, and he's very sad about this, and he doesn't know if they're alive because the occupation's gotten more crazy. So it's basically, that begins the spiritual pilgrimage part of India, was finally seeing Sonam grieving his family and how different it was than I was grieving Sati. Because the pivotal moment really came when we were hiking up in the Himalayas, as we did almost every day. And we went up high one day to make an offering to some hermits, and he picked up some snow. And he goes, "Oh, this India snow, very same Tibet snow, many, many sad, thinking my family." And I put my arm around him, and I just said, "I'm so sorry, about the situation and that you can't find your family." And he looked at me, and he had tears in his eyes. And he laughed, and he goes, "Jaimal, you funny. This very sad, no problem." And that very sad, no problem became kind of a mantra, and it broke me out of this habit I was in of using meditation kind of to skim over emotions. Like, you want to be there, you want to be the guru right away, and
it's called spiritual bypass.
Right, exactly. And I think being around all those Tibetan deities, where they have, the wrathful and the ethereal, are all revered and part of the nature, part of God, and so that, along with seeing Sonam really live that non-duality, was powerful. So
that's. I was struck in the book by how your relationship with him and his attitude, of course, prompted you to really seriously consider the reality of what he was living, and see how it would apply. And in fact, there's one part you say in the book, "I often wondered how Sonam maintained his contentment while also clearly grieving. I felt that I had two settings, upbeat and joyful, usually due to the future feeling bright, or guilt and despair because the future, it seemed difficult. These settings were more like rivals, dark and light, than parts of myself that could live in harmony." And the idea of being able to live on those two planes of consciousness at the same time is in my experience in life, is one of the deepest keys to being in balance, to living on a balanced way on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, I don't know. I mean, Ram Dass himself at these retreats and things that we do, he brings that up all the time. It's how do you embrace the 10,000 demons and the 10,000 devas? How do you embrace it in the same moment? And this takes tremendous work and reorienting of your perspective in life, big time. So just tell me about how your perspective started to reorient as a result of the reality of these people that, when you're with people like this, they definitely that vibration enters into you and it does something. There's no doubt. Not to mention just in India itself, which is so powerful because of its uh, the thousands of years of embodying these incredible truths.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point that it's the key is being around other people who have done it and kind of mirroring them, because of course I was familiar with these ideas that, any you read a few spiritual books and you get familiar with this notion of non-duality, that the Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it, is as much in the dishes and the fear as it is in the peak moments of bliss. But meanwhile, you're approaching practice in a more graded way, where you're saying, I'm here and I want to be there, and so I meditate for a little bit, and I feel a little better, but then I fall back again, and you're kind of you're judging your meditation just like you're judging uh, anything in the world, whether you like a movie or not, or and so seeing Sonam embody this was one thing, but of course I had to mix it with intense period of practice. So that moment, this very sad no problem, I did start repeating that to myself and trying to grieve a little bit more, just letting myself cry. But I couldn't really do it. I'd been trained, I think as a male in America, you're trained not to really feel. It's like feelings are a sign of weakness or what have you. And I'd come from a long lineage of military men and so forth. So, but anyway, I went in, I met a friend, as I talk about in the book, who actually I met doing yoga teacher training with Baba Hari Das, and I hadn't seen her in years. And she was this New Yorker, real fast talking businesswoman who was just getting into yoga with Baba Hari Das. And at the time, she seemed like she was, a real beginner and was asking silly questions. What I perceived as silly questions then. And then I ran into her in India, and she'd been practicing really seriously with Tibetan lamas for years, and she looked amazing, and she was so radiant. And she looked at me and she goes, "You look awful." And it was true. I felt awful. I was still in this pining for sati business. And she said, "You need to go on retreat." And so I took her word for it, and I went on a 10-day silent retreat. And
yeah, Vipassana retreat, right?
A Vipassana retreat. It was a Goenka retreat. It was just, I almost didn't care what the style was. I just wanted to go into a deep silent retreat. So I went on a Vipassana retreat. Yeah. And, as happens on silent retreat, you want to leave on the first day and you're thinking, gosh, I have 9 more days of this. And then, but, by day 5 or 6, I got a memory of sati and started crying. And I think usually I would have used like some Chan stoicism to sort of try to cut the emotion off. But I was thinking of Sonam's "This very sad no problem," just feel it, let it come through. I wasn't chasing the sadness, but just letting it be. And it turned out that I cried for about 3 days on that retreat. I mean, literally, I would go and do a sit. You do about an hour, and then I would go back to my little hut and just sob. And it wasn't like I was trying to. It was just coming through. And
I'm assuming it was more than the gal, though. At
the
some
gal,
point,
yeah,
right?
you're right. You hit the nail on the head. Is At first the tears were coming about sati, and then I was, all of a sudden these memories of my parents' divorce, of, you know, trauma on the playground in second grade.
Suffering,
It was
yeah.
like all these layers of the onion, getting peeled away. And so, I can only imagine that continues and continues and continues in spiritual layers of karma. But, I was sort of just working through all those emotional layers on that retreat.
Mm. Yeah, and there's a quote that you make of. Well, I love this one. Without a hat, a winter rain falls on me. So what, Basho?
Yeah.
We can't get with that kind of stuff here in the West. It's just like people, what? No, no, it hurts. We have no ability, and I include myself, by the way, no ability to withstand discomfort. I mean, I can withstand a lot of discomfort because I spent a lot of time in India, but the emotional discomfort, for instance, or things obviously like grief and all the different kinds of suffering. You have this quote in here. Uh, you call a Buddha's first teaching. It's sort of translated as life is a bumpy ride. Uh, he's birth is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Association with the unbeloved is suffering. I love that. Separation from the loved is suffering, and not getting what is wanted is suffering. And we have no way in the West. We are trained in the opposite way to avoid it at all costs. So we have no way to be like your friend Sonam.
Yeah,
It's
it's true. I mean, I think we do have a way, but we are. It's a reversal of the of what we're trained in. Yeah, I'm not sure where that comes from, but it seems like we're trained in the West to think if we work hard enough that at some point the suffering is going to stop. It's almost like there's a there's a goal where if you get that money and get the
yeah, right.
relationship and get the car, that it'll be good, and the suffering, and so you and the right insurance plan and all of it, you that it's going to be perfect. And I think that's almost, it's that expectation that life at some point will be a happy circumstance rather than, just the opposite perspective, which is, well, of course the happiness has to be found inside because the circumstances are always going to be bumpy. We live in samsara. This is, the bumpy ride. And I love, yeah, I love that about traveling to India or meeting people like Sonam, because they're expecting it. It's like, yeah, you know, you this is part of life. Death is part of life. Sickness is part of life. So uh, you don't shy away from it or try to wiggle away from it as
Yeah.
much. But I think, here we are in the great sort of integration of ideas, and you can, but I'm glad you brought up that it's about being around people who do have that perspective, because you can read about it and you can try to practice it in your meditation in your life. But as soon as you meet somebody who's living this sort of integrated way, it becomes
Yep.
much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm living proof of that. Meeting who
Yeah.
I met, but there's another. I was gonna. I couldn't. Unfortunately, I'll paraphrase it. But there was somebody I wanted to bring up to you and quote from. His name is Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. People who listen to Mindrolling, I refer to him quite a bit.
Hmm.
Have you heard of him, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche? He died in
The
the
name
80s.
the name rings a bell. Was he one of the in the Gelugpa tradition, the Dalai Lama's
Yeah,
lineage?
I believe so. And he was a
Yeah.
teacher of the Dalai Lama. He was one of the greatest lamas of the last century. I
Hmm.
mean, he was
Yeah.
as they say. He's just tremendous. Anyhow, he what he said, and we're talking about meeting somebody who embodies rather than teaches these what we go to meditation courses for, and mindfulness courses, and chant and pray and meditate, that they live it, and they don't have to do anything. And he says, if you meet such a being, there is no estimation of the value of that meeting and for them spiritual a true teacher and a siddha or bodhisattva. They're talking about a
Hmm.
bodhisattva,
Hmm.
not somebody who teaches, but someone who is it. Not
Hmm.
somebody who points the way, but someone who is the way. And that
Mhm.
rub off is absolutely incredible. And he says there isn't anything that's more important in this life if you manage to meet the teacher,
Hmm.
the true teacher.
Hmm.
And in my experience and knowing with Neem Karoli Baba, there wasn't a necessity, it has not been, and it's current. People meet him all the time. He does, obviously, through dreams and through day-to-day experience, through reading about him, through seeing a picture, whatever. They don't need a body, so it's not a matter of trying to run off. What I'm trying to say is run off to India necessarily. Although there's nothing wrong with going to India as well. There are still beings there that are absolutely incredible. And you yourself, you met somebody this monk, right? Who was just a regular monk, but
Mhm. Yeah.
but he embodied a certain um, visceral understanding of reality that
Mhm.
is not. Um, that's the beauty of India. There's people like this popping around that
There
are
are.
living.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that quote. Well, and he led me to, there's sort of people, like the Tibetan mandala. You have these sort of levels of uh, deities and ordinary folk and bodhisattvas with the Buddha at the center. And Sonam was, sometimes you meet one of the people on the periphery of the mandala and they lead you toward toward the center. And Sonam led me to various people who I only met briefly. And one of them was this hermit who I write about. When we get involved in the story goes on, and Sanam develops a scheme to go and find his family, um, and we go and see this hermit who's meditating in the highlands above Bagsunat, and uh, this is pretty common that once you have done your study and all your offerings and such, maybe the last 20 years as a monk you'll go and live in the highlands and just practice. And we were bringing offerings to him, uh, and and when we got up there, I mean, it was he opened the door and was laughing, and he said, "Oh, had no idea we were coming." And he said, "Oh, of course, I knew I should make lunch for three." And he invited
Mm-hmm.
us in. And we had this delicious lunch with a hermit, and no language. I mean, no English. And to this day, I mean, just that hour in this hermit's hut was probably one of the most profound moments of my life. And it was nothing he said. We were talking about logistics, and it was just I felt pinpricks and you know all the things that you can't describe in language. Um, and then when he took my hands, and this happened to me several times in that area, navigating around with Sonam, where an older monk would come and grab me by the hands, and this hermit was one, and another guy just randomly did it, a lama or rinpoche, and they just take your hands and almost looked like they were going to cry, and just say some mantras or just say a few words and that I couldn't understand. And it was like that transference, whatever happened, was worth all the meditation,
Mm-hmm.
of the retreat,
Mm.
because you saw what was possible. You saw it in their eyes and you felt it. And then there was, of course, we are more like waves than solid stone or something. So whatever is happening between you in that exchange is profound.
Mm.
So yeah, it's very fortunate to be there at all. And I think you kind of you get into it. It's like getting in the river. You meet one person like Sanam, and then he teaches you a few things, and then but then you're in the river, and so and there's all kinds of people who are of a similar mind, sort of in that stream, and yeah, I love just talking about it because I can kind of it's a it's like it's in the past, but that frame of mind that can happen in the
Mm.
Himalayas, it's like it's always there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
kind of tap into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what have been your, I'm curious because you've been doing this much longer. What have your, did you, uh, been your sort of moments like that in, meeting teachers? I'm sure there have been many, but
Well, no, I mean, there hasn't. Well, I have met, a lot of different teachers, babas, yogis, swamis, and all of it, because it's been such a long period. But there was no one. There has nobody like Neem Karoli Baba. I mean,
yeah,
absolutely. He is considered. He's considered in India a siddha, not a saint. There's like
right.
for every 1,000 saints, there's maybe a siddha. This is a well. You were in India, so they consider Shirdi. You've seen Shirdi Sai Baba. He's everywhere in India, right? The
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Yeah.
So he is. He's probably considered the most transparent um, I- example of a siddha. Like he was not. There was no attachment to anything. There was nothing. They lived in non-duality in a body, which is rare, and only through the love of the devotees. And they don't teach except by their being. They don't write books. They don't give lectures or anything like that. So Maharaji was very much that. And
Hmm.
I mean, your story of the hermit saying, "Oh, you've come. Oh, I'm glad I cooked for three." Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a famous story with Ramdas getting on a bus going out of a Vipassana course and with 27 people, and they were on their way to Delhi, and they stopped. They were going through Allahabad, and somebody said, "Oh, let's go to where the Ganges meets the Ganga and the Yamuna and Saraswati meet together. It's where the big melas are, Kumbh, and big gatherings." And he said he's thinking to himself, "Shit, no, I want to go get an ice cream in Delhi. I've been in this meditation course. It's like I gotta have a bed. Forget about it." But there was at the same time he thought, well, we should, Ramdas wanted to do the righteous thing, do something spiritual. So somebody said make a left, and he made the left, and he made that decision because he hired the bus, and they went down there, and someone said, "Oh, let's go to a Hanuman temple. There's Hanuman in the Mela." And they went there, and as they got there, Maharaji arrived. At that, they hadn't been able to find him for like months, 4 months. They couldn't find him in India, so they had done this meditation course, and they arrived there, and there he is, and he says, "Follow me back." Of course, they all freak out that he's there with this
Yeah.
devotee, and they go to the devotee's house, whose name was Dada Mukherjee, great one of our mentors. And his wife comes out, and she tells Ramdas, "Oh, Maharaji woke us up at 6 o'clock in the morning and said you're going to have 28 guests for lunch. Prepare." Same kind of these things, and they do. They
Yeah.
point to. Oh, I mean, that's obviously once you're dipped into whatever it is that's the one, however you want to call whatever it is.
Mm.
It's all accessible, and so that's not the big deal is the unconditional love, and
Hmm.
that's you were approached by somebody who looks at you like you're the last person on earth,
Hmm.
and they're holding you in that moment. That's
Hmm.
something that, as you just said, never leaves.
Yeah,
So
that's very true. And yeah, it's so different than what these sort of just de-stress like mindfulness courses are that I think are the rage now in different corporate settings and whatnot. You can get like meditations being taught as just sort of take the edge off, get a little bit better at work, be more productive,
yeah,
which is all good. I mean, I think it's all good. If you dip a toe, it can all of a sudden reveal all sorts of other aspects. But when you see somebody who has this look of unconditional love in their eyes for a stranger,
yeah,
and then they've developed
yeah,
that heart, it's you just see what's possible. And
yeah.
I think
That's it.
it's motivational
Yeah,
because it's not easy to do the practice, and you it's easier just to watch TV and
yeah,
go go get the money or whatever. But
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, it is the most important thing, I think, is being able to see the potential
Yeah.
in a
And that's what
teacher's
it is.
eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's what it is. I mean, not to mention, of course, in our case, and a case of meaning the people that were there, Krishna Das. I don't know if you know. Maybe you know
Hmm.
Krishna Das, as most people
Sure.
do,
Yeah.
and Ram Dass and myself, and there's people like Dr. Larry Brilliant, who helped suppress or get rid of smallpox in the East. Danny Goleman, who's people who really were given a mission when they came back without being given anything. Although with Larry
Yeah.
Brilliant's case, that's a wonderful book called, by the way, Sometimes Brilliant. You might like it.
Mm.
And you out there
Mm.
listening right now, Sometimes Brilliant, Larry Brilliant. It's a wonderful book that really describes that whole thing around him getting to India and then being told by Maharaji, go to UN and you be part of getting rid of smallpox. Meaning he was a long-haired hippie doctor that couldn't get
Mm.
arrested at the UN. It was a great story.
Oh,
Uh,
right. I'm recalling this now. Yeah, and
yeah,
he worked for Google, and
yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Of course.
exactly. Yeah. Certainly, there's some real uh, manifestations of it that physical manifestations in terms of what he did with people, that their whole lives were changed and put into a direction that was really has been of service for sure. Ram Dass being the biggest example of that. But the idea that you look at the big also is what you said, seeing the potential of this being is a human being still,
Mhm.
obviously has
Mhm.
karma of eons to be born like this, because it's not a matter of being taught in this lifetime. And that's why I love, so the seeing the potential is really important, and that's why I love what His Holiness the Dalai Lama represents these
Mhm.
days in the world. My
Mhm.
only religion is kindness.
Mhm.
And it's about, he talks a lot about secular ethics and so on. I mean, there's this. So this Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. Let me just share one little thing. Um, he's just talking about how, people go out and teach the Dharma to hundreds of thousands of students and do thousands of practices and meritorious acts. But if self-clinging is still your mind's most firmly rooted theme, your activity will never be that of a bodhisattva. It'll never
Mhm.
be that of real open-heartedness. To be a bodhisattva and carry out a bodhisattva's activity, you must uproot all trace of selfishness from within. To
Mhm.
me, that's the place to start with. You don't have to have
Mhm.
big thing around enlightenment and being this, that, being anything. But
Mhm.
really dealing, I mean, we see our selfishness on a day-to-day basis, do we not? I mean, it's amazing.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I just that's why there's a lot of wonderful passages in the book where you are, very, very honest with where you're at. And I think in the reading of that, I mean, you're pointing to something that I think is really, really great for people to relate with. I thought you were a little younger, but you're really old at 37. So.
Well, I'm writing about a period where I'm younger because I thought the stories in from that period would be, uh, uh, you know, sometimes having a little adventure tale to go along with the the moment allows people to relate, and I was able to travel a lot in that time of life. So, um, but I think you're right. I mean, going back to your quote, that's the place to start, and it's one of the reasons I come back to. I think I could be making metaphors about golf or baseball or cooking just as much as I could surfing, but there is one thing that uh, going back to living sort of in touch with the divine in the midst of the madness of everyday life is that the wave metaphor is really good because it gives you a tangible notion that, okay, even when you're caught in self-clinging or really in a spiral of anxiety, and you're telling all these stories about whatever, how awful you are, or how you failed at work or in a relationship, those dark moments, that how do you flip that into, well, this too is the oneness, or this too is the divine. And it's, if you see that thought process as a wave, it's that spiraling wave. What is its essence? Its essence is always water. And so there's this energy that you're caught in, and you can kind of be resisting it. But just like getting caught in a wave, if you resist it, you run out of air, you're fighting, it's much worse. But if you kind of just let go, the wave passes by and you end up saving your energy, and then you come up and then it's just water again. And it was always water to begin with. And so, yeah, it's a tangible metaphor to work with. And because, reality is actually, the little Legos do move as particles and waves, as we're learning now from particle physics, I think there's something there as well, in that this theme of waves is some part of us deep down, like, knows experientially, how that works. And so you trigger this sort of meta picture of the sea, and people get it. It's like, they're like, oh yeah, this emotion is coming through like a wave, but I'm the sea. I don't have to identify with this wave and say, oh, this is me. This is, this is why I'm, failing again. It's like, no, that's just a passing energy. And when you're the ocean, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's a tsunami, it's like, you can handle that. It's like a blip, so.
How about, one of the, give us an example of one of those waves that you engaged with. There's a couple that were a little bit like, wow, like that one you fell
like
off like a house, the top
waves.
of a...
The literal waves,
Yeah.
ocean waves. Yeah, there's a couple stories, I mean, in the book where one of them, I'm in Bali, and I've basically just gotten out of graduate school, where I then come and get a job, and I'm thinking, I got a magazine writing job, I got a girlfriend, I'm working in a city, like, maybe this is life, I'm an adult now. And then a year goes by and I'm like, oh shit, is this all life is about? Mm-hmm. It's like I'm in the 9 to 5, and practice is just kind of keeping my head above water. But so I go to Bali to reflect and think about, what I'm really doing. And I meet this guy, Jimmy, who's an incredible surfer, and also sort of a yogi in his own right. And his spiritual awakening, if you will, came when he was surfing an outer atoll in Indonesia, and he got a cerebral malaria coma. And months later, whoa, he woke up from the coma, had to relearn how to walk and talk all over again. And so, anyway, we're out surfing at this break called Impossibles, which is a difficult wave. Yeah. And he surfs it beautifully, and the reefs in Indonesia are very dangerous because you fall and you get tumbled on these bacteria-ridden, razor-sharp reefs. So I'm watching Jimmy, and he's about 30 years older than me. He says, let's go surf this wave, Padang Padang, where it's much more dangerous. And I basically vowed that I'm not going to surf out there on this trip because I've heard stories and I don't want to go home. That's not the lesson I'm looking for. But we go over, and on the way, I ask him, it comes up in passing about the coma. And he says, oh, it looks like Padang looks like where I got bitten by the mosquito that gave him cerebral malaria. So I asked him about what he experienced in the coma, and he never told me the story. And it turns out that he had this near-death experience, basically, where he was I won't go into the whole story because it's a bit long, but he was consumed in bliss, and he woke up from the coma after that dream saying, San Sebastian, San Sebastian, I saw an angel. And it turns out there were various coincidences about the San Sebastian story that he tells me. So anyway, hearing this story, it's like all of a sudden it turns on all your spiritual switches, and you're like, oh yeah, I don't have to be in this mindset of like trying to figure it all out, trying to, what about just being, and what about faith? And so I decide, he's kind of turned me on, and I say, okay, I'm going to surf this scary wave. And basically, everything in me is clamming up. I have all that adrenaline, and and yet this huge set, massive, probably 2 or 3 times my height comes, and I think just being, again, it's like being with somebody like Jimmy, who's reflecting a certain amount of fearlessness. I just find myself going. And this is one of these waves that's famous for being hollow, and where you get into there's really no way to make it out of the wave without being inside the wave, in the tube. So I zoom down this, barely make it to my feet, am airborne, make it down to the bottom of this wave, and it does something that I've just never seen a wave look anything like this. It's like, there I am, and it looks like there's just a blue tunnel falling from space, that's about to encase me, and there's nowhere you can go. It's reef 2 feet below you. And so everything in you is saying, leap off. But if you leap off, you're leaping onto the reef. And so I just stay there, and it's only a few seconds that you're in the wave, in this tunnel. But it feels like time just stops in there. And so I won't give away the whole story, but, I there I am. And I make it just about to the end of that wave. And all this indecision that I'm in about, what kind of life I want to live. It's like those few seconds of infinity in the tube, and then the subsequent smashing onto the reef, help me find a little answer. And I've always found that in life, that, you sort of, when you're in those moments of indecision, you can't control it. You can't be the controller and say, all right, I'm gonna figure this out, and I'm gonna lock down, and and I'll find the answer. It's much more of a surrendering. And it's the same when you're in you have to be shaken out of your desire to control. And that's really what the wave was doing for me, because you can't control. And I think to an extent, that's why surfers put ourselves, and people and athletes, we put ourselves in those situations to be reminded, ultimately, that, you can't try to control everything.
Yeah, right. We used to have a mentor, Krishnadas and I, who's passed some time back, but he was. There was a comic strip back in the '60s called Mr. Natural. He was like the guru for the hippies and so on. He was just totally present all the time. And this man named K.C. Tiwari used to say to us, if you think you're doing it, my boy, you are lost. Every day. So, like that is so true. So we're coming to the end, but Jaimal, one thing, as I started this whole conversation with you out around Haridas Baba and the relationship to Neem Karoli Baba and us and so on. So, and you're going to India, you're on that classical journey to the east, which we did as well. And in fact, you even found Vipassana, which was a big thing for us too. That's, I told you the story of the bus. That's where they were, the Vipassana course in Bodh Gaya. So there's a lot. That's why this was one of the reasons that it was really wonderful for me to read and relate to. Wow, fast forward from then, 40 years, 45 years, and the same thing is really going on.
Hmm.
And you're being taken into the same places that we've been talking about in terms of letting go, in terms of allowing pain and suffering to be alongside of happiness, bliss, etc. So the other parallel, if you would call it, in the book is Robert Thurmond, who is a good friend to us, and certainly many of the teachers on the Be Here Now network, Sharon Salzberg and Christian Usser, very close to
Hmm.
Bob, and he's such a great being. We would see him pass us by when we were in with Neem Karoli Baba in the foothills of the Himalayas. He would stop, almost in wave kind of a deal. It's just so it's really a very connective thing, and he is a brilliant guy. And so when I got to this, I guess you pulled some of this stuff that approximated being in talks with him and so on and so forth. I think that's what you said in the book. Yeah. Um,
That's yeah. I wanted to get him right because Bob speaks in long monologues, and he's very exacting, and I knew that I couldn't remember exactly his words, and so I pulled some quotes from his books.
mm,
But I mean, he speaks very much like he writes, so
yeah.
not far off.
Yeah, we just did a podcast together recently, about a month and a half ago or something. Yeah, he's you could be with him for like hours. He can go on. I mean, and it's entertaining. It's not just informative and such knowledge that he has, and practicality too. He's just really wonderful. But and I suppose you met him too. Finally.
Yeah, well, he was. I mean, he was my professor, and then he was also my advisor while
Mm.
I was in Columbia. So I would go into his office occasionally, and usually it was about financing. He would be helping me get some extra funding or something. He was always very compassionate in that regard. He would work for his students like crazy to get us a little money
Yeah.
to be able to stay in school.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, any encounter with him was always kind of magical, just by virtue of who he is. He's such an he's just such a one of a kind. He's got the glass eye and all the rings, and as a 25-year-old in grad school, you have all these professors who kind of fit a type to some extent. I mean, there's a lot of diversity at Columbia, but he doesn't fit any of it, and you're just like, and I'd read some of his books, but again, I mean, in the book, I compare him to Vimalakirti, who's this great Indian sage who lived at the time of the Buddha and was a layman who found, you know, that the nature was everywhere, and he would go into casinos and go into
Mm.
gambling houses and really everywhere, political parties, and he went in order to show that this this mind is possible anywhere. And Bob, I was reading that sutra. He's written an incredible translation of it, and then I met him, and it was like he was taking all the madness of New York and spinning it into the mandala, and just showing that, hey, it's all right here.
Yeah.
And the way he laughs and the way he tells jokes and the way he brings politics into his lectures, you just, it's one of a kind. So I had to. He's hard to capture on the page, so I used a lot of his
Yeah.
own language.
Yeah. Yeah. Just there was one little passage that I love so much. I gotta share it with you. Thurmond says there's an extremely subtle body mind. This is the indestructible drop. I never heard that before in my whole life. Indestructible drop called the energy mind, indivisible of clear light transparency. It's like Very hard to describe or understand, yes, Bob, and not to be misconstrued as a rigid, fixed identity. This subtlest, most essential state of an individual, you were talking about the core of who we are, is a being's deepest state of pure soul. Another non-Buddhist expression,
Yes.
Bob, where the being is intelligent light, alive and singular, continuous yet changing, aware of its infinite interconnection with everything. It is beyond all instinct patterns of lust, aggression, or delusion, and makes the boundless process of reincarnation possible. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, Jaimal. Thanks for putting this in there. I mean, I haven't seen that before. Thurmond says this indestructible drop resided in the heart center, which totally connects to my tradition, our tradition of bhakti yoga. You know, through Neem Karoli Baba, and everything that we were given is exactly that. Which it's all one circle. All of this stuff is
Yeah.
just amazing. Oh boy, great book.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
All
Thanks
our
for.
waves are water, stumbling towards enlightenment and the perfect ride. Jaimal Yogis, also author of Saltwater Buddha. We'll have to sometime in the nearer future. Let's talk about Saltwater Buddha. And well, actually, you know what? I was going to talk to you a little. You see, time just flies here with all of this. Your last book was about the Fear Project, right? Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, that was more of a scientific
Yeah.
base, but yeah.
Neuroscience of fear and courage. I would have wanted to get into. Maybe we'll do it again after you get
Let's do
off
it
your
again.
book tour. Let's do that, because these are the kinds of conversations that are of the most interest to me, and of course I'm hoping with everybody we're sharing this with today. So thank you, Jaimal. Jaimal, how do people get? Do you have a website or Facebook group? People can be in touch with you.
Do. Yeah, I'm in all the usual places, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and I announce, I'm uh, doing a little bit of meditation teaching
Mm.
at like 1440
Oh yeah,
in Santa Cruz this January, and so I have some retreats, and then I'm on the road for the book right now. So
yeah.
probably Facebook is the easiest place to find me. I also have a website, JaimalYogis.com.
JaimalYogis. Could not believe Jama Yogi. I mean, derivative of, okay. You can't go wrong. You're set, Jaimal. Thank you for coming and sharing. And definitely, though, I'm serious. I want to get with you again, and just have a little bit more chat around this last book that you did. But
Likewise.
yeah, this is Mindrolling and the Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, and you can go to the page where this podcast resides. And we, of course, in the show notes, will put links to the books and links to Jaimal, so you can all be in touch. And you, by the way, go buy the book through Amazon through our link, because then we get a little bit of a percentage that helps support what we're doing. And we know everybody has been great, and we want you to continue to do that, because so I can sit here and talk to people like Jaimal, basically. Thank you again. And we'll see you next time on Mind Rolling.